we are covering the breaking news of the first arrests in a scandal that intersects in ominous ways for the president with the impeachment inquiry into Donald Trump's efforts to solicit Ukrainian interference in the 2020 election. Today, two associates of Rudy Giuliani, the president's shadow Secretary of State when it comes to U.S.-Ukrainian relations, were indicted for criminal campaign finance violations. The Wall Street Journal broke the news and reports, quote, the men were charged with 4 counts, including conspiracy, falsification of records, and lying to the FEC about their political donations, according to the indictment that outlines a conspiracy to funnel a Russian donor's money into U.S. elections. A former law enforcement official pointed out to me, quote, it shows the architect of their shadow foreign policy, Rudy, was in bed with 2 guys who were actively breaking FEC law, soliciting foreign money for U.S. campaigns, and lying about everything. Sound familiar? End quote. The 2 men who were charged today lunched with Giuliani at the Trump Hotel in D.C. yesterday. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. They're already being compared to Nixon's plumbers. They were arrested last night at Dulles Airport trying to leave the U.S. with one-way plane tickets and no known plans to return. The New York Times reports of the 2 indicted Giuliani associates, quote, Mr. Parnas and Mr. Fruman have acted as emissaries in Ukraine for Mr. Giuliani, as he has sought to uncover information about and encourage investigations into Mr. Trump's rivals, including Mr. Biden. Federal prosecutors spoke out this afternoon about the investigation and left the distinct impression that it could be sprawling and ongoing.
These allegations are not about some technicality, a civil violation, or an error on a form. This investigation is about corrupt behavior, deliberate law-breaking. The FBI takes the obligation to tackle corruption seriously. There are no exceptions to this rule.
As this office has made clear, we will not hesitate to investigate and prosecute those who engage in criminal conduct that draws into question the integrity of our political process. And I want to add that this investigation is continuing.
On the intersection with the impeachment inquiry, both men were scheduled to testify in the House impeachment investigation and have now been subpoenaed. Today's indictment also connects the associates of Rudy Giuliani to efforts to remove the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, an effort that, according to the indictment, was, quote, at the request of one or more Ukrainian government officials. Of course, Donald Trump did eventually order the ambassador's ouster, reportedly because she stood in the way of his efforts to pressure Ukraine to investigate Biden. Her firing is now a central flashpoint of the Ukraine scandal, and we should point out that Yovanovitch is still, as of this hour, expected to testify in the impeachment probe tomorrow. That's despite the White House's vow to stonewall that investigation. That is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Frank Figliuzzi, former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI, New York Times Washington correspondent Mike Schmidt, former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner with us at the table, Tim O'Brien, executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion, and congressional reporter for Politico, Melanie Zanona. Let me start with you, Frank Figliuzzi. Just go.
Well, when the U.S. Attorney himself says the investigation is continuing, the investigation is continuing. When the indictment itself says that this conspiracy involved others, known and unknown, there are others that are being investigated and likely may be charged. And I would warn all of these people, including Rudy Giuliani, that when I read this indictment and the level of detail and specificity, I smell not only human informants, but I also smell a wiretap or some form of electronic surveillance. And that means it's going to be very hard for people like Rudy Giuliani to say, I don't know anything. These guys were doing this without my knowledge. I don't get it. There's a congressman named here, reportedly Pete Sessions. He and Rudy both should be deeply concerned this afternoon.
Just flesh that point out a little bit more. You're saying because once the FBI had probable cause to suspect that these 2 Giuliani associates were committing crimes, they were likely listening to them with legally authorized wiretaps. And if Rudy is a co-conspirator, they would have heard him too. Is that your point?
Well, you've taken it a logical step forward. I want to be clear that I don't have specific knowledge that there was a wiretap in this event, but I will tell you that typically when you see this level of detail in the indictment and actual dates, times, quotes, you're looking at a combination of either a human source and or legally authorized electronic surveillance of these two guys. Is it likely then, perhaps, that Rudy or others would have been captured incidentally on such coverage? You bet.
Mike Schmidt, you and your colleagues have reported on the effort that Rudy was in the middle of to get the Ukrainians to dig up dirt on Joe Biden. You and your colleagues have also reported on the whistleblower complaint that brought all that to our attention. Explain who Marie Yovanovitch is in that tale, and then take us through where she plays in today's indictments.
Well, she was the ambassador to Kiev, and she had been removed, and there are some questions around why that happened. But I think we're sort of missing sort of the larger context here. Giuliani was brought on by the president to help get rid of the Mueller investigation and the investigation into Michael Cohen. It was to move public opinion in the president's favor. Now, what happened was that Giuliani was fairly successful. Nothing came of those. The president did fine. He was sort of off free. But what happens is that Giuliani had continued to try and clear the president's name, and with that, continued other efforts, which we're learning about in connection with this today, that have really undermined the president. So while Giuliani really helped him on one hand, on another, he dragged the president into another scandal
that may end up getting him impeached. I mean, pull that thread a little further for us. I mean, this idea that Giuliani was running a shadow foreign policy is tied with all sorts of legal exposure for Giuliani. Who was paying him? Who was he feeding back into? Was Pompeo running his ambassadors through Giuliani? I mean, what are the threads of that part of the story that you just mentioned?
I mean, it's important to know that the context of this is that Trump and Giuliani were trying to clear.
Mike, we're going to fix your microphone. I think we just lost you. Glenn Kirshner, can you pick up that thread of all of the potential legal exposure for Giuliani for running that campaign that Mike Schmidt just described, trying to, I guess, in Giuliani's mind, clear Donald Trump's name? Probably a version of the story that only exists in Rudy and Donald Trump's imagination. But he may have, by taking on that effort, by running this operation in Ukraine, he may get him impeached.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Giuliani is probably not going to get a whole lot of shut-eye tonight, Nicole, because, you know, anytime I'm a former federal prosecutor, bring a conspiracy charge like this with multiple co-conspirators, I know the first thing that I'm going to do, and probably what I've been doing in combination with my law enforcement agents who have been working this case, is to figure out where the weak spots are. What cooperating witnesses can we develop? And, you know, Fruman and Parnas are probably not going to enjoy being guests of the federal government in Manhattan, where I suspect they will be detained pending trial. And you can bet there will be a full-on push to try to get them to flip. And, you know, the natural person that they could flip on, it seems, is Rudy Giuliani. You know, I couldn't help but chuckle when I saw that they were having lunch yesterday at a Trump property with Rudy Giuliani. And because the takedown was already imminent at that point, I suspect they were under surveillance. I suspect they were perhaps even being listened in on by agents. You don't have a Fourth Amendment privacy interest in your conversations in public places. So I agree with Frank. There was probably also Title III wiretaps up and running. So, you know, Giuliani may have a world of hurt coming at him as a result.
Mike Schmidt, what is our latest understanding? Has anyone heard from Giuliani today?
I believe we've spoken to Giuliani a few times today, and I don't think we've gotten a sort of a clear answer about how he sees this. He's sort of, given us some different responses on different things, and we expect to hear more from him later today. It'll be interesting to see, though, going forward, what his posture is on this. Certainly for the president, he took this perspective. He was going to throw everything against the wall to make it more confusing and difficult to understand. He did a lot of television. He did a lot of interviews with the press to try and move public opinion. This is a different type of animal. This is not about public opinion. This is about criminal law. And it'll be, I wait to see whether he ratchets back this sort of aggressive nature that he has had, that he believes has been very successful for the president.
Frank Figliuzzi, I was just handed news that Parnas and Fruman, the Giuliani associates indicted today, appeared in court again for their bond hearing. A judge granted their release pending $1 million each in bond. Is that a lot?
They have it. They seem to have it. They have access to it. Yes, it's a lot. I think the judge had to weigh the facts that were staring the judge in the face, which is these guys were headed for the airport with one-way tickets. So you could argue there's a flight risk, and he had to kind of balance this out. So, yeah, I think the amount is a reflection of the gravity of the charges and who these two guys are.
Let's, Tim O'Brien, slow this down. There's so much in this. What they were doing, as I understand it, first of all, campaign finance violations, a conspiracy to defraud an electorate, is where Donald Trump is already an unindicted co-conspirator. Is that right?
That's right.
SDNY has already identified Donald Trump as an unindicted co-conspirator in an illegal campaign finance scheme
involving his former lover.
Right. So this would be the second campaign finance conspiracy being prosecuted by SDNY?
Yes, it would be.
And again, we have two people working for and with Rudy funneling money from a Russian. Is that a coincidence?
Well, I don't know that it's a coincidence. I think it's one of the things to me that's most intriguing about all this. Two of the sort of unknowns in these recent events are who is the source of the funds from Russia. Should it turn out to be someone like Oleg Deripaska, you're going to bring Paul Manafort back into this. You bring the Ukraine back into this.
And Rudy never brought Paul Manafort out of it. He was in jail getting political strategic advice from Paul Manafort recently.
That's right, but also one of his goals when Rudy was digging in Ukraine was to try to clear Manafort up. That was one of the sort of the third leg of the stool as for why he was over there. I think the second thing is what was the conversation that Rudy had with Fruman and Parnas before they decided to leave the country? Were they wired when that conversation occurred? When Frank says Rudy better be very careful, he's going to have to make sure that his stories line up with their stories and that it lines up with whatever federal agents heard when they were surveilling this team. I think two of the sort of interesting twin pillars here are, on the one hand, you have Donald Trump, who still is not passing Introduction to Crime 101. He picks up the phone himself to call the Ukraine. Richard Nixon didn't walk over to Watergate.
And it was the day after the Mueller report, too, that he did that.
After the Mueller report.
Or the Mueller hearing.
The Mueller hearing, and then sort of the end of all that, he digs himself into it the next day. They don't have enough intermediaries between Trump and all of these nefarious acts. And then he's got a personal attorney who's a graduate of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, a force for policing crime on Wall Street. That's how he made his name, Rudy Giuliani, who displays, at least according by what I'm seeing in this indictment, a real level of almost ignorance or a suspension of disbelief about what his former office would do with some of what he was engaged in and what they were seeing. And this is going to come back and haunt both of these men now.
There's a sense, I think, among some Democrats that there was a sort of failure to launch after the Mueller report came out. What do you detect from your sources on Capitol Hill about the speed with which they've adapted to the fast-moving, changing fact pattern in this scandal?
It's completely different than what we've seen with the Mueller report. With the Mueller report, they couldn't get information out. And just over the past few weeks, think about all the evidence that has come out. We had the transcript of the president's call with Ukraine. We've had the damning text messages between those diplomats that came out last week. We've had the whistleblower complaint with more whistleblowers coming forward. And now we have an arrest in connection to the Ukraine scandal. And in that indictment, it says these associates were trying to influence politicians. They're trying to oust this ambassador, which then we know the president did end up doing. I mean, there's a lot of dots that still need to be connected, but it is getting harder and harder for the White House to say there's nothing to see here.
That is an interesting sort of parallel, Frank Figliuzzi, to the operation that Mike described, that Rudy ran this sort of fog machine to muddy up the very opaque, very private, very walled off investigation run by Bob Mueller and his deputies, as opposed to this. This is almost like sticking a puppy cam on Donald Trump and his cohorts and all of their criminal conduct and broadcasting it for the world to see. Does that make it easier or harder to investigate and prosecute them?
Well, I think it makes it easier. And again, I'm impressed with the level of detail we're already getting in this. And keep in mind, in an indictment, you're putting in just the information you need to get the charges done. But there's much more to this. And look, with regard to how this points to the president's either approving Rudy Giuliani doing this, working with these guys. We've got him in a phone call with the Ukraine president saying, I want you to talk to Rudy about investigating Biden. Or he's looking the other way while Rudy goes out and finds mercenaries to do the dirty deeds. I don't know which is worse, but he really can't plead ignorance in this. He can plead stupidity, but he can't plead ignorance.
Mike Schmidt, you reported on the White House decision to block the testimony of Gordon Sondland at the beginning of the week. Any such efforts underway? Are you picking up anything that they'll seek to block the testimony of Marie Yovanovitch tomorrow?
No, but as we've seen, they have taken this posture, but they're not going to cooperate. So it'll be interesting to see if they actually let that go forward, because they've basically said, we're not going to help. We're not going to allow anything to go. I think the calculation on their part is basically that cooperating could hand over facts that they think could be bad for them, and the not cooperating obstruction is better because it means that less facts will come out, and they can sort of fall back on that. And that, look, they think that the Democrats are going to move forward with impeachment anyway. If they wrap that up into it, what's the difference? They haven't had to disclose new facts.
You know, Glenn Kirshner, it suggests, I mean, that analysis suggests that all of these diplomats, if asked, you know, how high up did the decision go to trade military aid for dirt on the Bidens, that if that were a good story for Donald Trump or Mike Pompeo, there'd be cameras in these depositions. I mean, it suggests, as Mike said, that the facts are more harmful to them than the image of stonewalling an impeachment inquiry that now, according to a Fox News poll, has majority support from the public.
Yeah. And you know, let's not forget that when Bill Taylor began to expressly out some of this information in text messages, and Sondland said, hey, let's not talk over text, it's been reported that Sondland starts communicating with the president. What does that tell us about who's leading the charge, about who is really the point person on this dirty deal with Ukraine to withhold funds that have been allocated to Ukraine for their own protection against Russian aggression in exchange for possibly dirt, false dirt, phony dirt on Joe Biden? It sure seems like it's all working its way up to the president. I just hope, Nicole, that we don't get so distracted now about, well, who is Fruman and who is Parnas and will Giuliani fall or what's going to happen, that we lose track of that summary of that extraordinarily damaging phone call, which sort of proves in a self-contained way the high crime and misdemeanor.
All right, Frank Figliuzzi, I'll take Glenn's note and read to you from that partial transcript released by the White House of Donald Trump's call with the Ukrainian president, where he specifically talks about the U.S. ambassador, Marie Yovanovitch, expected to testify tomorrow. Donald Trump says this on the July 25th call transcript. The former ambassador from the U.S., the woman, of course he says the woman, was bad news, and the people she was dealing with in the Ukraine were bad news. So I just want to let you know that. He later added she's going to go through some things. Frank, just pull out for me, like taffy, the intersection of Donald Trump's, not just green lighting, but perhaps even ordering her removal, and the desire by the two indicted men who were fixers for Giuliani, now charged with illegal campaign finance violations, also wanting her removed. Is that a coincidence in your eyes?
No, I don't believe in coincidences. And I have to tell you, when I hear the line, she's going to go through some things, I can't help but recall some mob wires and drug wires where you hear guys saying, some harm's going to come to her. That's what it sounds like, and it may have been meaning she's going to get canned. But look, we've got the president saying to the Ukraine president, you got to talk to Rudy Giuliani. We've got reports that Giuliani played a significant role in the termination or stepping down of our ambassador to the Ukraine. Now we have these two guys arrested at Dulles Airport. They're involved with Rudy and in trying to investigate Biden, and they're making payoffs, funneling foreign money from a foreign national who appears to be Russian into the United States. So this is all going to be connected. The dots are there. What I'm intrigued by, and I'd be curious to hear Glenn and others' opinion on this, is the degree to which the Attorney General, don't forget, he's out there trying to muck up the origins of the special counsel investigation. He's been out there trying to foment that ridiculous notion that this is all about Ukraine, that Ukraine hacked our election, that Ukraine did all of this to us, not Russia. And yet this arrest takes place. So I'm just fascinated by whether or not SDNY and FBI briefed Barr that these guys are headed for the airport. We're taking them down now, and the degree to which this investigation will be allowed to continue. And I just want to say something. The role of the media and the role of whistleblowers, when we say we feel helpless, when we say we don't think anything's getting done, we don't know what to do, don't discount the pressure that's placed on somebody like the Attorney General when he gets called out for what he's been doing, and when he knows that whistleblowers won't take it anymore, so that if he shut down the SDNY case or said, we're not arresting Rudy's friends, there would be hell to pay. And I think the media and whistleblowers have played a role in that.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.